Lynyrd Skynyrd went on first. So then, of course, you had the opposite. There was this guy who was standing behind my brother and I and the friends that we brought, and he must have been like 7'12". I mean, this guy was an absolute tower, and he was already drunk by the time he got to the show, and he was holding his beer up in the air, and the whole night, the whole time during Lynyrd Skynyrd's set, because they played first, he was yelling, "ZZ!" and, sloshing his beer around and basically spilling it all over people. He spilled it on our friends. And so every time I hear this, Queen, ZZ Bad Nasty, I always think of the 7-foot-something guy standing behind us at that concert 20 years ago yelling, "ZZ!" all the way through Lynyrd Skynyrd's set.
Shoot the Core Cast.
Welcome to Shoot the Corecast, the official companion podcast to the RF Generation Shmup Club. This is a family-friendly shmup-themed podcast that thinks enemy weapons are like Pokemon. You gotta catch 'em all. I am Addicted, and with me I have...
MetalFRO, also known as the Game Boy Guru. And RF Generation is the place to be, rfgeneration.com, who we're affiliated with on the podcast. We have a great community there. We've got excellent forums, and of course, that's where you can go and sign up for the Shmup Club Game of the Month, and then also go on and do the regular community playthrough. We also have articles on the front page that many of us are contributors to. A huge database of games where you can catalog your game collection and create wish lists. Plus, we have a Discord that's active, and we chat in there. And lots of other cool stuff going on. So make sure you check it out, rfgeneration.com, and it is all free.
Excellent. Now, my favorite part of RF Generation definitely has to be the 2019/2020, maybe 2021, Beat Every NES Game Challenge. I participated in that in 2019. I had a lot of fun trying to beat Tiny Toon Adventures, and if you're looking up for a challenge or maybe a little bit of something to do as you shelter in place, it's a good site to check out, and come join us and beat every NES game.
Yeah, I need to jump back into that. I contributed some last year, but I definitely need to jump back in, because I know there are a couple of games on the list yet that I own and need to try and scratch a couple more items off.
Yeah, too bad Colored Dinosaur's already taken.
Oh, man. Darn the luck.
I know. You'll just have to take something easy like Dirty Harry, right?
I don't have that one, so...
Oh, Dirty Harry is notoriously hard to do. It's enigma wrapped up in a riddle, wrapped up in a quagmire. There's a great angry video game episode on that. Not family friendly on that one, disclaimer, but it's a great episode. It's one of those things that's like, where the heck do I go? What am I supposed to be doing? What is this thing supposed to do in here type games?
Okay. So, a decent chunk of the NES library.
Yeah. Well, speaking of questions, we've got a question of the month.
Yeah. I put out this question of the month on the Shoot the Corecast Twitter account, @ShootCorecast, and we got the most insane and awesome response that we've ever had for a question of the month. So who knew that copying the playcast with a question of the month would yield these kinds of dividends? But seriously, thank you to everyone who put in responses, and after what an overwhelming response we got this month, if next month is the same, we may have to scale it back slightly and cherry pick some of the responses because we had so many.
Well, it's okay. As long as we don't go on for an hour to an hour and a half talking about concert and music, we'll be able to fit it all in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that helps. So the question of the month is, what is a mechanic in shooting games that you don't like and would do away with forever? And we definitely brought the salt from several of the people who follow the account. So right off the bat, Nefarious Wes, at Nefarious_Wes, he says, speed power-ups. Can't stand that crap, I'll say. I like adjustable speed at any point during the game. Great example of why I don't like it is in Gradius 2 Famicom. I only like 2 speed power-ups, but that won't cut it during the boss rush. Then I'm too fast for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I would have to agree. That's something that is sort of it's a hallmark of this series, but it's something that, as you saw, as shmups evolved, it really doesn't need to be there. I always jokingly refer to it as rowing across the stars. It's not one of my favorites either. I prefer to have one speed, well, I should say a variable speed, but I usually, like Einhand or within the game of the month here, Gaiares, prefer to just set it to as fast as you can go and then focus my attention on the maneuverability of the ship. If you're going to be doing with something where you have different speeds on there, make them adjacent to the different ship types. So you have your fast, you have your slow, something like that. Don't make it so that if I die, then all of a sudden I have to spend the next 5 minutes trying to readjust my speed on there. It just kills the fun pretty quickly.
I think it's a relic of early scrolling shooters that probably needs to go away. I do like either variable speed or the kind of 2-speed thing that you get with a lot of Danmaku games where you have 1 speed and then you have a slower speed when you're doing a focus shot kind of a thing. I don't mind some shoot 'em ups later that have a good base speed, and then there are speed up power ups that you could get that are optional, that if you like a faster ship or there's an area in the game later that you're going to need it for, you can pick one up. But when the base speed feels like you're wading through a vat of pudding, that's a problem. So I'll have to agree with Wes on this one.
I could just see you dying in Gradius. It's pudding time. All right, we have one from @WavyAmar. It says, holding a button for sub-weapon rather than having an extra button. And I could definitely see this on here. I think that it probably goes back maybe in some ways to the JAMA standard when you only had 3. But even so, a lot of the shmups in there usually were like a 2-button affair. It's really weird that they had the option for the 3rd button and just didn't utilize it. Speaking like back to 1984 and 1984's 1982. Oh, sorry, 1984's 1942. And dealing with that where you had one button that was to shoot and the other button was loops. Or with 1943, it seems to be, I don't know if there was a particular reason why they went with that, maybe for simplicity or something. It's a really odd design choice.
Yeah, there's a couple of games like that where I'm trying to think of, I want to say it's Darius Force or Supernova on the Super NES, where you have one button that is your laser weapon, and then you have one button that's your sort of missile or laser sub-weapon. And so if you want to do rapid fire of all that at the same time, you have to hold down 2 buttons. I sort of get why they did it in that game because of how the weapon system is structured, and I'm assuming that we'll get to that one at some point and get into more detail of that, but that kind of drives me nuts.
Oh, definitely.
So I get it.
All right, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, so Shmups and Stuff on Switch, or @nshmups, says, not a mechanic as such, but scores going beyond the billions frustrate me. especially if there are no commas or other indications to help break it down. And, again, this is one of those things where, a little bit of salt coming out, and there are going to be some people salty about that answer, but I kind of get that. I mean, there's a novelty factor about those kinds of high scores that's kind of cool. When I first played Gigawing in the arcade and I saw how ridiculously large the scores were, I was like, what is this? And what's with these ridiculous scores? I thought it was kind of cool. And of course, there are a lot of shmups now where, especially a lot of the cave shmups, there's been a lot of talk around the scene of a lot of cave shmups with exploiting certain things within the game, boss milking or different things, and people getting counter stops on some of these games where they are literally running the score up as far as the programming of the game will allow it to be calculated. And then essentially, at that point, you don't get any more score. So it's interesting to think about. I suppose it depends on what the developer's trying to accomplish with that. Because obviously, if you're just playing a game straight and you're not really doing any kind of strategy or you're not engaging in the score system, your score is probably going to be relatively small unless you just sort of luck your way into, a better score by occasionally getting something right. But for the people who really enjoy those kinds of more complex scoring systems, that's their bread and butter. So I kind of see both sides of it. For casual players, I can see how that would be kind of annoying. But for score chasers, I understand why those kinds of higher score thresholds are fun.
Yeah, I can see both as well. At least it's not as fun killing as the... Have you heard of the PC Engine game War of the Dead?
No.
Okay, it's not a shmup. It's sort of like a very early side-scrolling... I know a lot of people talk about Sweet Home being the inspiration for Resident Evil, but this is earlier. This is very proto horror game, but it had a problem where it didn't have a counter stop, and it counted your score as part of your experience. So what could happen is if you spent too much time playing the game, you could actually over level, and then you would round the counter, so you go from like level 99 and you end up at level 0. And then instantly you would just gimp yourself pretty quickly on there, making the game impossible to finish.
Wow.
So I'm thankful that there's nothing like that, but it's definitely something that I could see both sides on. And if you have a chance to check out, it's only on the PC Engine, so if you have a EverDrive or you want to check it out in emulation, take a look at War of the Dead. It's also pretty cheap, I believe like $20 or less complete in box.
Huh, cool.
Alright, the next one comes from us at Zoido, aka TOB. It said the power-up bar in the Gradius series. I definitely would have to agree. I prefer being able to manage that. They definitely got better in the later part of the series, where you could change that around and make it so those are... I'm trying to think of if it was Gradius 5. I'm trying to remember the exact one where they allowed you to change it there. Maybe it was Gradius Gaiden that was the first one that allowed you to do it. Do you know off the top of your head?
Three on the Super Famicom and Super NES gave you the ability to granularly choose what your options were. But right. I think
not to actually put it first, though, right? It gave the option to choose what your options would be, the rotate and stuff. But the one that actually gives the ability to put hey, I want to put speed last. I'm trying to remember if that was Gaiden or if that was...
Oh, yeah. I don't remember which one that was. I know 5 has pre-built loadouts that you can choose from.
I think it's Gaiden that allows you to put those in any order that you want.
Right.
I'm sure I can find it later, but it's definitely a point of irritation. And I can understand why they did it, having it on there, but it just having immediately to deal with speed, as we mentioned, and then the next one always has to be missile, and then 3, really kills the pacing of the game once you've depleted your first life.
Right. At Sarah Thumbs, or Sean C., says, lack of training modes and save states. Lack of online leaderboards. And he says, a real one, though. Lock-on systems on shmups. There are a lot of mechanics I've not liked over the years and have come around to, so this may be one of them.
I swear that he's channeling Mark MSX on that one from Electric Underground with the lack of training modes and save states, lack of online leading boards.
Yeah, those are definitely hot buttons for Mark. I gotta push back on the lock-on system, though, because the Ray series and Sukigoden Tai, I mean, those are great games. So, hey, to each their own, but I can't back your play on those.
You know, with the lock-on systems, there's one game, and even though it's more shmup adjacent, that really comes to mind is Panzer Dragoon. That without a lock-on system in that game, you really lose at least a quarter of the feel of and play of that game.
Oh, absolutely.
I would say that it's an absolute necessity for shmups. Oh, and here's another one for you: the technical soft one, the very expensive Hyperduel.
Oh, sure.
Hyperduel is another one that would definitely be really changed up if it didn't have on there. I think that lock-on systems, well, not needed for shmup today, definitely have their place and were integral and necessary system to have in a mid-90s shmup.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are enough good games that have been done with lock-on systems over the years that that mechanic has earned its place among the shmup mechanic, you know, I won't say Hall of Fame, but, you know, something that should be regarded as...
It's something that's more of a mechanic and less of a gimmick.
Right.
And I completely agree. It's, although you could sort of say that your focus shot is in some ways lock-on, or variant of the lock-on system.
Sure.
But, you know, again, to each their own, and I understand completely why you think it might just sort of be a little bit easy mode, because you're just hovering a mouse cursor over something and double-clicking in some ways.
Right.
I would say we're really very dependent upon the game, but I like it, in my personal opinion. All right, so on to the next one. At Cloudy Music, lack of auto fire. And this one could be taken in many different ways, too. Mark's take on there is if it was built into the game on there or enhances it in a way, then it should be enabled or should be allowed. I think the same thing, too. If I have a twin Famicom with rapid fire that's built in, you bet I'm going to use it for playing Gradius 2 or any of those other shmups on there, or the TurboGrafx. Looking at that, or your later PC engine, like the Core Graphics 2, all of those came standard with auto fire. I don't believe it cheating for you to actively use what was built into the system.
Yeah, and I would say, generally speaking, I would agree. I do think there are some games that, depending on the other mechanics that are in play, or the way that the game is designed, autofire might not always make sense, but where it makes sense, I would agree. I just turned 43, and I have no desire to get carpal tunnel, so while I will occasionally go nuts with hammering a button on a joystick, you know, I can do that on my good joystick that I bought that has Sanwa buttons and has, a short throw, and it's not a big deal because I'm only going to play for an hour or so a night when I do that, and, you know, I'm not injuring myself too much. But I don't want to hammer on an NES pad or a Sega Genesis controller. I want to just hold the button down. So when I have the ability to use autofire, I'm going to use it. And if you think it's cheating, oh well.
Well, you just made me start thinking of a new idea for a gamer product. Takahashi Meijin's Carpal tunnel syndrome simulator.
Yes. Yes. At Sprite Mix says, checkpoint systems. I'm a big advocate for instant respawning upon a death. And I gotta say, I'm with you on that, I think, in most instances. There are some games that are designed specifically for checkpoints, or, things like Gradius or R-Type, where they design them in such a way that at the checkpoint, you're going to have an opportunity to power up again in some way. So in those instances, I don't think it's too bad, but particularly for games where the stages are longer, and so then the checkpoints become punitive, or a game where, when you die, there may be a power-up or two that spawns that you can go and pick up right away, something like a Raiden, that kind of a thing. That's going to make that experience flow a lot better, and it's just going to make the game feel better because you're not really breaking up the action. You're just jumping right back into the fray, and after a few iframes, you're back into the action. So, yeah, I would tend to agree with that on the whole.
Yeah, I agree with you, Fro. I think that having a instant action works really well for most games. However, some of the classic games, such as you mentioned R-Type and Gradius, and Proteus, there's another game that we just recently covered. Well, I shouldn't say recently. It feels like so long ago now. But Grid Seeker, that game, if you had instant respawns on that game, it would just be so terrible because those bosses, you'd be sitting there with your pea shooter for at least 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, just trying to take down a single boss.
All right.
Yeah. The next one comes to us from GalaxSpark79, also known as Brandon Guerrera. The power-up system in games like Truxton, Fireshark, Dragon Spirit, and Dodonpachi, where you have to collect a certain amount of power-up icons, 2, 3, or even 5, to level up your main weapon one level, and when you die, you gotta waste time to build it back from base level. Yeah, I could definitely see on there where I'm trying to think of, aside from Dodonpachi or Dragon Spirit, Fireshark, or Truxton, when you're trying to deal with different... I'm drawing a little bit of a blank here. Thinking of a shmup that I recently played that does the same. I guess you could say that our shmup for next month, in some ways, Steel Vampire, is sort of along this way. Thankfully, allows you to save it, so they learn from that. Do you have some thoughts on this, Fro?
Yeah, I mean, the examples that Brandon gave, I would tend to agree with. Truxton and Fireshark are both great games, but yeah, it's annoying to have to collect so many power-up icons just to move up one level. It's different in something like a series of compile games where the P icons that drop, or in something like Blazing Lasers, where you've got those purple orbs and you collect so many to move up to the next level. When those kinds of things are plentiful and you have the opportunity to power up semi-frequently, that's one thing. But when you only have a handful of these things in specified locations scattered throughout the level, then it becomes an exercise in frustration. And of course, these are games that require a certain amount of memorization, so there's an element of that too. But yeah, it becomes a bit of an exercise in frustration to get most of the way through the level, and oh look, I just collected the 5th power-up, and now I have twice the amount of firepower, and 5 seconds later, and I'm dead. And at that point, sometimes, yeah, it feels like, what's the point? Why am I even continuing? Other than to play a little bit further and see what else the level has in store. So, yeah, I understand where he's coming from, and I would tend to agree that when you have to collect multiple power-ups just to move up one level, that gets old.
Yeah, well, I guess in some ways it's a variant or evolution of the Gradius power-up, right? In the evolution of Gradius syndrome.
Kind of.
All right, I'll take kind of. Go on to the next one, please.
Yeah, so at John PV says, sidebar stuff that the game wants you to pay attention to. Not the gadgets like M2 ads, but more something like Raiden 5. With all the story stuff going on while I'm trying to dodge bullets and ships. Leave me the F alone. And of course, there was some discussion on this, and so DJ Play School responded to this, and then John responded to DJ Play School and said, "You will keep hearing jokes about South American coffee, and you'll like it. Oh, you missed an enemy? I will berate your performance in between coffee jokes on screen." And he says, "I love Raiden 5 and hate it so much at the same time." And then he also says, "I wanted to add but ran out of space. I loathe vertical games without a Tate mode. Why, Raiden 5? Why?"
Tate mode!
Tate mode! Yeah. I'm feeling your pain on that a little bit, John. I understand why they didn't do it, because the way that Moss designed the game was designed specifically to use the stuff that they put on the sides, especially the stuff on the left side, like the cheer notifications and the score tracker and, you know, your weapon power-up levels and all of that stuff. I think there's probably a more elegant way they could have done it, so that they could have done a vertical mode on it, especially since they ported it to Switch, which of course would give those of us with the flip grip the ability to play that in a more usable way. I mean, some of the bullets in that are so small on the Switch's screen that it's just impractical to try and play it in handheld mode. So I get what you're saying. Obviously, that was by design from Moss, but I think in general you're right. I mean, vertical games that are designed with that in mind, unless they're designed as a vertical where it scrolls vertically, but, you know, it's something more like, what was the other one that Moss did? Caladrius. You know, that's designed in such a way that it's vertical scrolling, but it uses the wide play field. Or like the Vasara collection, the Vasara Timeless, I think it's called, the Timeless mode. You know, those are designed with that kind of aspect ratio in mind. Or like some of the Capcom 90s shmups, like Gunbird 2, or not Gunbird 2, what am I thinking of? Gigawing, or Mars Matrix, or 1944 The Loop Master. Those were all vertical shmups that were designed with a Yoko or a horizontal monitor orientation because of the cabinets that they were going in. So I don't think it's that bad. Raiden 5 might seem like a more egregious example, but I think there are probably fewer games like that outside of console ports on, say, 8 and 16-bit systems, and so it's less of an issue now. But yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, it was neat for them to try and put in a cheer system. I would have definitely liked to see Tate's support as well. In the cheer system, you might as well just have it say, like and subscribe or something on there. And that would have been about as useful a gadget and something. It was neat, just sort of something for them to try. The M2 ports really nail it with useful gadgets, and this is just sort of a way for them to try and take it and make it into something useful. And yeah, they didn't really succeed. The plot itself is very, well, I mean, it's always been about craziness and never intended to make sense, so I guess they might as well just go B-movie with coffee and circuits.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been the font for all the plot and the reading through could have been in Wingdings and had the same effect on the gameplay, right?
Yep.
So I totally get it. It would have been a nice feature to have, but I'm pretty certain that they wanted to do a quick and dirty port because they need to get stuff done, and shmups unfortunately just don't make money as much like they used to. You're going to have your hardcore crowd, but outside of that it's going to be hard to recoup the investment cost, so why put in the extra effort unless you're M2, who I'm sure takes a loss on this stuff.
Probably, yep.
As depressing as that is to say.
Yeah.
All right, our next one is from Need New Shorts, aka JB. Well, hopefully you get some shorts soon. Not having weapons fire continuously when the button is held down, or if not that, lack of auto fire. Oh, a second for lack of auto fire. My second favorite shmups have the Centipede and Gun Neck. Both continue to fire if you hold the button down. And the new Bit Blaster XL has a constant auto fire option. Very cool.
Yep. Maz, or at Maz6708-6804, says, a lot of good answers already. I will go maybe a little unpopular here. Boring, long, and repetitive boss milking, like the original Esp Raid or Radiant Silvergun. They simply destroy the flow of the game, and for a shmup, the tempo is of the utmost importance to me. Of course, you can ignore it and speed kill the boss, but for score, they are usually mandatory. Boss milking have to be creatively challenging and not drag for too long. I have the feeling this one will be hugely unpopular. And I guess I don't really have an opinion on this one so much. I think if the boss milking gets excessive, then I would find that boring. But I do think it's fun to do things like picking apart bosses, or that kind of a thing. I understand the Esperate example because I want to say from what I've heard, the only way to get really, really high scores in that game is to milk bosses for a really long time. And if that's the only way to get a really high score, like sitting in a boss for 20 minutes, picking off missiles and things that it shoots out, or popcorn enemies that come along because the bosses don't time out, then yeah, I'm not going to play that game for score, or I'm going to play that game for score, but in a less serious way, because those kinds of things I'm not interested in. But I could see how some people might find that interesting, or a way to additionally challenge themselves. So sure, I think it's probably on a case-by-case basis.
All right, our next comment comes to us from @Quentin1. Glitch scoring mechanics like empty lock and Ketsui. Yeah, the empty lock is definitely a glitch on there. However, it's something that I hate to say it, but you're gonna need it in order to get those high scores again. I wish that there would be a differentiation, or maybe some sort of patch where you can turn it on and off. Would be nice to have a separation in the leaderboards for that. But it's, again, one of those things that if it's built into the game, no matter if it's a glitch or not, people are going to take advantage of it, and you're going to have to decide on a case-by-case basis or person-by-person basis if you're going to use it and how much it affects you. Personally, I would like to see things more as a game of skill than than exploiting systems. Just like with pinball, it gets really exciting when you see somebody who is truly skilled and knows what they're doing and can show you how the table plays, versus someone who goes, oh yeah, if you do this, this, and this, you can glitch it and then score an extra 90 million points. I get the same thing for someone who is really good in sports. If you see them knowing them, like, or I guess you could say too, someone who's singing in front of like American Idol, or dealing with The Voice, when they start singing a really hard song by Whitney Houston, and you can tell that they have a great vocal range, and it's really hard to do, you're impressed. Versus just somebody who can sing a pop song really quickly and really well.
Yeah, I kind of see where Quentin is coming from. I mean, I think that's a valid take. There are definitely people who find those kinds of mechanics interesting, and it's another layer of being able to play the game and get even more out of it than what even probably the developers intended. I messed around with Empty Lock a little bit in Ketsui, and it's not something that I'm probably going to pursue that much because I don't see myself reaching the level of hardcore score master kind of a thing. But yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree that playing the game as much as it's intended to be played is kind of the way I like to approach it. I say that, and of course I sort of bucked that trend with this month's game, which we'll get into, but yeah, I understand how when the scoring becomes nothing but finding a way to exploit a glitch or an exploit in the game, and that's the only way to get the really stupid high scores, I could see how that would be frustrating for someone coming in where either they don't want to learn the glitch, they just want to play the game straight, or they feel like, well, this wasn't even the way the game was meant to be played, but that's the only way to do it if I want to have any real way of competing. So I could see that. At Easy Racer, or at Easy_Racer, says, cycling power-ups with no way to control the cycling. Super frustrating to go out of the way to collect a specific weapon type only to have it change a split second before you collect it. Then you're usually stuck with something you don't want until you can repeat the process. And yeah, I understand where Easy Racer is coming from. I've had that frustration many times playing the Raiden series and some of the other games that kind of came out of that era where your power-up changes colors or the icon changes. You know, I had some of that frustration with Grid Seeker, even though the pattern was fairly predictable and I could kind of get to where I sort of knew when the power-up icon was going to change to a certain color or a certain type to sort of plan it out and do that. But yeah, I get that, because it can be frustrating when you're like, oh, that'll upgrade me to the next power-up level, but then instead of doing that, it just changes your weapon. And it kind of ruins your flow.
Yeah, I definitely had the same problem with Grid Seeker and within the Raiden series, how you're trying to connect those, and just at the last section or at the last second, it would change into something else. I believe with the Raiden, maybe I'm wrong with it. It's been a little bit since I played it, but you can actually shoot it to change it.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Maybe it's with some of the later Raiden games.
That could be.
Or maybe it's just wishful thinking. I'm not sure.
Huh.
All right, our next one comes from the Maniacs over at the Collector Cast. Limited continues. If I want a credit feed to have fun, just let me. And I would definitely say that that's something that I really think that M2 nailed perfectly in their ports, where you have it so each time you play, you earn another credit until you get to free play. I think that works really, really well. In fact, that's even used in the Thunder Force game, that pseudo sequel that shall not be named, by our favorites, Devil Engine.
Oh, right.
Devil Engine does the same thing there, but
yeah, and they did that in Gradius 5 too.
Yep.
Back in the day. Yeah, I mean, I think I would tend to agree. I understand why a lot of these games didn't have unlimited continues during the NES era, and even during the 16-bit era, where during the height of game rentals and things like that, or whatever, you know, you didn't want to sell a game for 30, 40, 50 bucks and then have your kids, you know, have the kids credit feed through it once and put it away, and have the parents write angry letters to publishers going, well, you know, I spent 50 bucks on this thing and my kid played it once. You know, it's like if the game has 2 credits, 3 credits, 4 credits, whatever, and your kid actually has to spend time with it and get good at it before they can beat the game, even if they have to feed the number of maximum credits that you're allotted, that's still they're having to put forth effort. So I kind of get it from that standpoint. But yeah, in today's world, if it's an arcade port or a home console shmup, whatever, yeah, let people credit feed and let them play the game the way they want to play it. I would agree.
Yeah, you don't want people to credit feed their way through Color a Dinosaur. Jeez, shame.
At The Single Banana, host of the RF Generation Playcast, says, items only good for points that provide no upgrade value. Remove these in every game that isn't distinctly point-based. And that's a hot take. I'm going to disagree. I do think that it's fun to collect items that are point-based. I mean, you're talking about all kinds of shoot-'em-ups that would be a lot less fun for me. Everything from old-school caravan shooters to things like modern Danmaku games where, a game like Crimson Clover, which we played last year, where when you're taking out enemies using the break system and you're getting all these stars. Now, of course, you're not necessarily having to go and move to the screen to collect those. A lot of those are being auto-collected. But, you got everything in between. The old caravan-style shoot-'em-ups where you have to go and fly over an item to grab it, or newer games where you can sort of auto-collect some things. But I enjoy that mechanic in a lot of these games, so I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with that. I think there's fun in grabbing those things. I mean, even as far back as playing Pac-Man in the arcade as a kid, I always tried to go for the fruit in the center, or those kinds of things, because to me that was part of the fun.
When I read items good only for points that provide no upgrade value, to me that screams modern games and modern DLC. It doesn't scream, shoot 'em ups on there. I would have to say that I enjoy this, like in Tiger Heli. Do you remember shooting the top of the house on there to get the special little item for points? Or when we were dealing with Raiden, where you had to shoot, I believe it was Raiden, Raiden 5, where you had to shoot the specific spots in order to get that. And that's been a staple of the series for quite a while.
Yeah.
Or even with 1942 and the what the heck is that thing called?
The Yashichi?
Yashichi, thank you. I would have probably named some sort of dessert base, like thankfully I didn't call it the manicotti or something. That's Italian. Thank you for providing that. It's neat to have those little interesting bonus items that are worth points on there that you can find. It's definitely a throwback, but it's something that gives a little bit of extra flavor to the game, and it's something that I personally appreciate it. But you're welcome to your own opinion, and I can see why those type of items would be a little bit boring too if they don't provide extra value or something to the gameplay loop.
Yep.
All right, the next one comes to us from Shoot the Core. Power downs. Oh, geez. Yes, definitely power downs. The infamous question marking, or it's not question mark, exclamation mark in the Gradius series on there. Oh no, when you get that in Proteus.
I was thinking of like the Strikers series. Where you graze an enemy or what have you, and then you get a power down.
Power down? Yeah.
I prefer power downs to outright death, but yeah, they're still annoying. Let's see. At MX5DOB, being forced to use charge shots as normal firepower is too weak. Twinkle Star Sprites is a good example. And they also offer a second choice here, the ranking in Rising games. Just let me power up my ship without a difficulty increase. So yeah, the charge shot thing I understand. If your regular shot is actually a pea shooter in an almost literal sense, then yeah, having to rely too much on a charge shot can be a bit of a design imbalance. And so I would agree with that. The rank system in Rising games, I don't know. There are a lot of people who really enjoy playing with the rank in those games and manipulating that, and that's part of the fun. I haven't got into those too much, but I understand how it's frustrating because they're pretty meticulous with how the rank increases and decreases, and they're pretty strict.
Our next one comes for us from @HooksandFanes. The abomination in the power-up bar paired with a random roulette power-up. Yeah, this is really precedented within the... More so, I would say most often I see this within the Parodius series. Maybe it's just because I play those more so than I do with some of the Gradius series. But there where it's like the auto power-up system, that's like, we think you should go this way. Why don't you get 2 speeds? Then you automatically go get your missiles, and after it's... Oh, that drives me nuts knowing I just turn it off and power up how I want to. Did this frustrate you?
Yeah. I mean, I think Hooks and Fangs was specifically referencing Parodius because the tweet included a picture of the an exclamation point that shows that power up roulette thing, and yeah, that frustrates me too. It's one of the things that has kept me from diving too deep into the Parodia series, but I know it's one that we're definitely going to need to dive into at some point.
Yeah, maybe we can do Sexy Parodius for February of next year.
For Valentine's Day.
Indeed.
There you go. I'll have to think about that. All right, so @ZPS_STG says, checkpoints, especially when they're really far apart and especially when the game respawns you with 0 power. So yeah, dovetailing on what Sprite Mix said earlier, again, I would tend to agree. Checkpoints work in games that are specifically designed for them, where you have an opportunity to power back up again, and they're made fair in that sense. But I kind of tend to prefer when a game allows you the option to give you an instant respawn, give you the chance to gain back at least some of your power-ups, and helps to kind of keep the flow of the game and the pace going.
Yeah, it does a pretty good job, as mentioned before, with keeping the momentum of the game going. I understand with some of the earlier stuff, as we talked about, how you need the chance to at least get the Gradius. You get your pea shooter and you get your 1 speed power up. That's what you get. But I understand how it just sort of kills the flow of a game when pushing back. I personally would prefer to have instant respawns for most games. Alright, moving on to 05 Pro. Games where the default speed is too slow and requires a power-up to get the speed to where it should have been at the default to begin with. Examples such as Gradius, R-Type, Last Resort, and others. Within the original R-Type, I don't remember, at least within the original R-Type, a speed power-up that was needed for there. Am I misremembering?
Yeah, you get speed ups within the game. The default ship ship speed on R-Type isn't quite as egregiously slow as Gradius, but I would say you got to have at least 1 speed power up to really have a good chance at dodging bullets and weaving in and out of things in R-Type. So it's not as bad as Gradius, but it's still an offender, I would say.
You want to see a fence on games that on the total opposite, where the game goes too fast. It looks like you're a racquetball inside a blender, or a ping pong inside a blender. Rock on for the PC Engine, the worst shmup on the system. You do more than like 2 or 3 speed power-ups on that thing, and your ship is just flying through there. It's the only game I think where your ship can become so fast you can't keep up with it. Mention it to Sarah next time he's on stream and watch his reaction. It's notoriously bad, and she, is the only one that starts out with the dearly beloved. We'll have to go over that one this time, but it's Kusoge at its finest.
Yeah, we'll have to have a Kusoge episode at some point. At KusoPlayer_KZ of course, who was on our Ketsui episode, says getting powered down completely after dying. And yeah, I think that's a pretty solid answer.
All right, the next one comes to us from @GameOverClub1, aka Max Impact 24. Lack of hope when you die and lose all your power-ups. Okay, so it's not really a mechanic. I would agree that lack of hope when you die, I think that is probably only pertains to Gradius 3 Arcade. I think that's the only game that actually kills hope.
Or Gradius 3 SA1.
Oh, geez, yes.
Yes. We're with you, Max Impact 24. So, at Mark MSX from the Electric Underground podcast says, power-ups that change type and reset level, like in Raiden. That sucks. And I think I understand what you're saying, Mark. Like, when you collect, let's say two of the red power-up and you power up your gun, and then you collect the blue power-up, it doesn't go up another level with your blue. It just switches to the blue at whatever power level you're at. I think there are a couple of games that are more egregious than that, where if you change weapon types, it resets to the base level. I can't think of an example right off the top of my head, but I know I've played something like that. Now, I will say in Raiden 5, they attempted to fix that by allowing you to power up all three of your weapon types independently. So when you change weapon types, it's always going to power up that weapon type beyond whatever its previous level was. But, you know, that's one thing. But yeah, I would tend to agree that when you're getting a power-up and all it's doing is changing the weapon type you're using, but it's not adding to your arsenal anything more, yeah, I can see that being a frustrating thing.
Definitely. Next one comes to us from Void Audio. He refers to loops. And I definitely agree. I got super frustrated and annoyed at all the loops I had to do in the 19XX series. It's just, really got to me. No, in all seriousness, and here I definitely think that loops or the special requirements for it, they're sort of neat, but I am opinion that it maybe should give you a little bit more to the game. I would prefer maybe to see a little bit more done with rank versus loops, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of the old school games, loops are more egregious because a lot of the older games that either are really long and then they loop, or they're hardly long at all and they loop forever. Those are annoying to play for score, because if you reach the point where you're good enough to loop the game 2 or 3 times, unless the game ramps up in difficulty enough that each loop is a different experience, even with the same layouts and all that, you know, it can kind of become rote. I mean, I know there are people who play Gradius games several loops in, and hats off to those folks who are capable of playing at that level. But I kind of like the idea of the way that loops are handled in a lot of cave games, because those games aren't super long, and you can get the base, 5 or 6 stages or whatever, and play those and have a good experience, and then get to the loop, and then that kind of takes you to sort of the next skill ceiling. So I appreciate what they're doing with that. Having said that, I understand the point, because at some level it would be nice to just say, here's the set of stages, and you have to get good enough to handle the game at such a level that you can reach the end and beat the boss.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get it.
I get to. I think that rank might work as a better element in there than having a second loop in there. So if your rank is at such a speed when you're reading there, you're going to get a different boss versus being on a second loop. I think that might be a better way going forward. But again, this is just my opinion.
Sure. At Steven_Nikolic says, super tight chaining requirements, and any mechanic that makes you want to avoid gaining rank. I understand that at some level, but I think rank management is one of those things that, depending on how it's implemented, can be an interesting mechanic. It's something that it's something that I'm learning more about, and something that I think will be interesting to continue to explore and learn as we play more games in the genre and kind of broaden our knowledge and experience with this stuff. So I'm not going to disagree, but I do think there's something intriguing about rank management in shmups that I've seen so far, and I think there are interesting and fun ways to implement it, and then there are ways to implement it that are overly punitive or maybe esoteric and hard to figure out that might not be as fun. So I think it's probably more situational.
I think that when dealing with chaining requirements or rank, I find it fascinating. And at first it was very frustrating, but the more I play stuff, and especially Steel, as we record this, we're deep into April thanks to all the changes in the world and dealing with how life works now with COVID. And that Steel Vampire really strikes a good pose between that and allowing you to either quickly power up, but you're going to get more weapons, or power down. Game's going to be easier, but you're not going to get as much score, and you're not going to get as good of weapons out there. Really a good risk reward with that. And it's something that I'm definitely going to be looking into more as we play throughout this month and get into in our discussion next month.
Yep.
All right, our next comment comes to us from Steven Eidner. Bullet hells in general, and I can understand bullet hells in general or Danmaku are all about routing and controlling the space. There, I mean, you can say R-Type and all the classic shmups is too. It's all about controlling the screen. But really, when you get to that point, it's sort of like any game's about controlling the screen and your space on there, right? But Danmaku, I think the best way I've heard it is you've got one of those, everyone's seen these before, maze games where you've got a ball that you got to get through a maze. But imagine the maze is constantly shifting on you. It's really hard for some people to wrap their head around, and it's something that has taken me a long time for me to train my brain to operate that way. Especially someone who's come in from playing games like R-Type, Gradius, Parodius, all of the classic shmups. It's definitely its own element. Then you put an addition in here. They're too much work. It's like how fighting games have become too dependent upon combos. The routing and everything, and making sure that you hit everything right on there without save states and without really putting in a lot of time. I can see how it's frustrating. It seems more like work than just having fun.
Yeah, all I'll say is a decade ago, I would have agreed with you, Steven. I didn't quite understand the appeal, and I felt like a lot of those games were impenetrable. Now that I've actually played some and have learned more about how they work, I find them a lot more appealing and intriguing, and something that, if the game is well designed enough, it makes me want to play it more and get better at it. I would say, for anyone who may be struggling with the idea of Danmaku games, bullet hell shmups, go watch the How to Shmup video series that Mark, the Electric Underground, is doing on YouTube. He has got some good kind of initial tutorials about how to approach these games. And of course, he's talking shmups in general, but since his focus is on cave and cave-style games, generally speaking, Danmaku games, they're concepts that are going to apply, and I think they're worth watching regardless, because it's going to give you an indication as to whether or not those types of games are going to be for you. If you haven't figured that out already, or if you're still wondering, is this something that I even want to devote the time to? Watching a couple of those tutorial videos and sort of seeing what the learning process is, I think will really help people to identify whether or not it's going to be a genre or a subset of the genre that they want to take a deep dive into.
I knew it. I knew that Toho would sneak in here somewhere.
Ha!
In all seriousness, Toho might be a good place for looking on there. It's going to have a low barrier of entry and allow you to get at least a good idea of how these games play. And there should be, again, Mark will echo the same sentiments there. The other one, if you know anybody who, and I wish this was available on Steam, but if you know anybody who has Fatari, it's region free on the 360, and it is a really great way to get into Danmaku games.
Yes. Yeah, Mushi Futari is great. So at Hauser or House XR says ranking management. Aiding/rising games are unplayable if you're not a 200 IQ shmup god. I wouldn't say they're unplayable, but yeah, I mean, playing something like Batrider or Battle Garega, if you don't understand the ranking and you're just collecting power-ups and things willy-nilly, the game can have a way of demoralizing you in a way. So you kind of do have to go in with a little bit of knowledge of how it plays, or you're going to quickly find out that the games aren't very forgiving. Having said that, I think there's merit to the rank management in those games, and I know that's something that I look forward to exploring when we get to one of those titles.
All right, our next one comes to us from @DavidBruno. Love all the responses so far. For me, it has to be losing power-ups that can fly off the screen after taking a hit or a death. I much prefer if they bounced off the screen for a while before disappearing. That and the screen shake. Looking at you, Cinemora. Oh my gosh, I have to agree with Cinemora. The screen shake. Oh, jeez. I don't need to have a visual thing on it. It just distracts from the gameplay, and hopefully we get to that game sometime next year, because it's definitely plentiful enough. But yes, that definitely distracts me and annoys me in that game.
Yeah. Let's see. Steel Ball Runner says, any shooting game where the bomber attack doesn't happen right away when you press the button and doesn't give you invulnerability until it explodes. It all started with Twin Cobra. I don't know if Twin Cobra was the first. I'm pretty sure there was a little bit of that with its predecessor, Tiger Heli, and I want to say there may have been a couple of earlier shmups that did that, but I understand that. You know, there are enough shooters out there that have sort of developed the idea that the instant you hit the bomb button, you have a few iframes, and most of those games, those bombs are going to either provide a shield against enemy fire or eliminate enemy fire in the game. Even if it's not all enemy fire, it's going to help clear the field so that you've got a little bit of relief. So I get that. I don't know if I can agree across the board, but I do see a merit in that frustration.
Our next one comes to us from @Beamlord. Polarity switching like an Ikaruga, because I'm really suck at that stuff. And I have to admit, as much as I play Ikaruga and I like it, I am terrible at that right now. So I'm hoping that we either get to that or Radiant Silvergun sometime within the near future so I can practice at getting better at it.
Yeah, the polarity switching is something that I find intriguing and interesting. I bought Ikaruga way back when it came out on GameCube, but I never got very good at it. So yeah, that's definitely one that we need to queue up and explore. I understand why it's frustrating, and I know there are people... Ikaruga is one of those, well, polarizing games, pardon the pun, where some people think that the polarity mechanic is really cool and is one of the interesting things about it, and other people just think that that's overrated and that, it's too much of a... turns Ikaruga into too much of a, Pac-Man shmup, where it becomes eating bullets. At Darius Schmupper says, not a shmup exclusive problem, but I think timers should be removed from character select screens in arcade ports. I could not agree more. I think I don't see anything wrong with straight ports coming across with those things still intact for people that want the pure arcade experience, but I think any developer who ports over a shmup, like an older arcade shmup, or brings forward a classic console shmup, for example, should have the ability or some way that you can set in the options to turn that off. Because that gets old for me too.
Our next one comes from Spatagy_OTA. Snipe shots coming from behind you fired by enemies that have already passed you and gone off screen. Maybe not a true mechanic, but a shmuppy thing that only causes me sadness. When I was trying to 1cc fighting Hawk, I killed the boss, only to lose my last life. After that, to a stray, but still alive, bullet from the boss hit me while I celebrated, so I couldn't beat the game. So I beat the game, but didn't. Got a proper 1cc of it soon after, thankfully. Well, congratulations on your 1cc, and I completely understand that frustration. A game that really strikes me on this, even though they weren't completely off screen, but they were there, was 1942. That game has snipe shots like crazy because the game is programmed to shoot where they believe you're going to move to, and it's a really good job of boxing you in and shooting to. There are a couple of instances in Gradius where that same thing happens on there. Would you have a couple examples, Fro?
Most of what I can think of is games where either on later levels or higher difficulties where, like console ports of old shmups and things like that, where depending on the TV you're playing on, if the enemy comes on screen but you don't see it because of overscan, then they may be shooting a bullet out a split second before you can actually see them. But other than those instances, I can't think of any particular examples, but I know that I've dealt with that, and I would tend to agree. I think bullets coming from off screen or shots being fired as an enemy's leaving the screen, that's just cheap, and I don't like that mechanic at all.
Yeah, we've got, speaking of that stuff, we'll add in a comment here from @S Barney Willis. The shrapnel post-death bullet from a vanquished enemy can exit stage right. It's the only way I can make it family friendly here. But I completely agree that the death animation, or that last gasp of enemies on there, can get really, really annoying and frustrating. It was cool to see a non-shmup game where I appreciate it would have been Rondo of Blood. That was neat to see. But within that they at least, so if you got hit from that final attack, it didn't kill you, it would just take off most of your life bar. So it was tolerable and didn't make you lose the game. Well, here he's talking about something that would make you lose a life or end your run.
Yeah, I know there are some people who appreciate revenge bullets or suicide bullets. I think it's probably, again, on a game-by-game basis. There are times when they're just really, really far too targeted or far too fast and furious. So, yeah, it probably depends. Our final entry here from at MX7X says end of level / game bonuses for lives, bombs, gems, whatever. Lazy, antiquated, and can invalidate other scoring mechanics. And wow, that once again, that is a hot take. I actually kind of enjoy that because a lot of times those are the kinds of things in like the Raiden series or, a lot of classic shmups or in a lot of newer games where you're collecting bonus items throughout the course of the stage and you're getting points for them along the way. And then if you manage to no miss a level, then a lot of times you're getting an additional bonus on top of that for staying alive throughout the course of that level and getting to the end with all of those medals or bonus items intact. So I just think that's an interesting way to make a game more deep in terms of the scoring. So I'm not necessarily on board with that. I get why some people would think it's lazy or antiquated, but I don't know. I enjoy it.
Yeah, I would say that it depends upon how it was implemented, but for the majority of the games, I do enjoy it. All right, and well, speaking of enjoyment on here, let's close off of the comment section. Thank you for all those who have typed in or written in. Let's start talking about our March game of the month, which is Gaiares. Now, Gaiares is, or should say, was developed and published in Japan by 1990 by Telenet, and published by Telenet's Western arm known as Renovation in 1990 for North America. Now, it's one of those ones that's a little bit hard to pronounce, but best way to think about this, and we're going to use your favorite word in here, Fro, is it's a portmanteau of Gaia and Resurrection.
Yes. So
Earth Resurrection. Think about it. Now, the company Telenet Japan started out as 1983 as Nippon Telenet or Telenet Japan, and was founded by Kawazuki Fukushima. The company began developing games for the MSX, Sharp X1, NEC PC-88, and other computing platforms, eventually moving over to the 16-bit consoles and ending up on the PlayStation 2 and GameCube. Throughout their time in the industry, they developed a strong publishing arm with a number of shooting games for the Mega Drive such as Whip Rush, Aeroflash, and Solfees. Gaiares was the only one that they developed internally. And Whip Rush, Aeroflash, and Solfees are all games that I definitely want to cover eventually.
Oh, for sure.
They're all seminal Genesis titles. Gaiares is famous in North America because of its mullet marketing campaign. Which consisted of 3 magazine advertisements which featured professional gamer Jamie Bunker praising the game. Bunker, who sported a mullet at the time of the advertisements, quickly became a meme on the internet over the last decade or so. And he's the guy who always had the shirt say, "Can you say Guy are us?"
Yes.
So Gaiares is also notable for being one of the earliest 8 megabit cartridges and potentially the earliest release by a third-party publisher. Gaiares is one of those ones in 1990 was striking, is that Genesis had really built itself upon bringing the arcade home. And I think that this would be one of the first titles that would actually deliver upon that promise. It really feels like, with its large bosses, its very varied use and great use of parallax scrolling on there. You've got a sound system that doesn't sound like it came out of a tin can. I mean, everything about this screams arcade brought home. And in 1990, because Genesis came out in 1989 in the US, so it came out a year after, really shows on how good a grasp they had on this. And I think it also showed within the way that it was reviewed in the West. Do you have any thoughts, bro?
Yeah, I mean, I had some discussion with someone here a couple, 3 weeks ago about this, and they were wondering, was this the first 8 megabit cartridge on the Genesis? And it wasn't, because that was actually Strider that Sega developed in-house as a conversion of the Capcom arcade game, but it certainly was among the earliest 8 megabit cartridges. And you can definitely tell, and we'll get into this more as we talk about the game, but you can definitely tell that there's just a lot of polish to the game in a number of ways. So yeah, it definitely feels like a premium 16-bit title for its time.
Also, I mean, 8 megabits, you're looking at Strider on there, you're going to get maybe 30 minutes of playtime at most. This game will definitely give you a lot more than 30 minutes of playtime.
Oh yeah, I mean, even just a straight playthrough of the game is fairly lengthy.
All right, and speaking of fairly lengthy, let's get into the plot. All right, so this is not as bad as Tex-Mexium, but it's still pretty interesting. In the year 3000, Earth has become a toxic dump ravaged by careless humans, leaving an uninhabitable, polluted wasteland. Well, keep in mind this is before WALL-E, so... the space pirates Golfer, led by the evil queen ZZ Badnusty, love that title, plan to harvest the pollution of the Earth to create weapons of mass destruction. Oh, that's where they were. The United Star Cluster of Leazoth sent a warning to the Earth about their plans, stating if they could not stop them, they would be forced to supernova the Earth's sun and to stop them themselves. But if they succeeded, Leazoth would use their technology to restore the Earth to its former beauty. Well, you know, when you put it that way, well, if you don't stop, total desolation, everybody dies. Or, you know, you kill these people and all of a sudden we make the Earth green and blue again. You know, it makes the choice fairly black and white. This is the main character's name, Dan. I believe it's pronounced Dare here, but you also say Dan Dare, known in Diaz as in the Japanese original, a young pilot from Earth, was chosen to be the pilot of a new fighter ship to combat the Golfer. The ship is armed with a powerful experimental weapon from Leazoth called the TOZ or TOZ system, which will be operated by Alexis, an emissary from Leazoth. There's only one other game that I can think of that, aside from like Captain Planet or something, that really has a ecological backstory on it, and that would be Eco Fighters that came out for the CPS2 in the arcade.
Yeah. Can we just take a minute and revel in the awesomeness and amazingness that is the name Queen ZZ Badnusty? Oh, I just love it, and I gotta bring this up because it's related to the name, but you know, Queen ZZ Badnusty. Well, what else is ZZ? Well, ZZ Top, right? Now, I'll just say it. I actually went to see ZZ Top, my brother and I, back in, what was it, 99? And they were doing a co-headlining tour with Lynyrd Skynyrd. And you know, when you go to a concert, there's always the one guy in the back of the hall or the back of the venue, no matter who's playing, that always has his beer up in the air and yells, "Freebird!" You know, well, of course, when the band that plays Freebird is doing their concert, no one needs to do that. So Lynyrd Skynyrd went on first. So then, of course, you had the opposite. There was this guy who was standing behind my brother and I and the friends that we brought, and he must have been like 7'12". I mean, this guy was an absolute tower. And he was already drunk by the time he got to the show, and he was holding his beer up in the air, And the whole night, the whole time during Leonard Skinner's set, because they played first, he was yelling, "ZZ!" and, sloshing his beer around and basically spilling it all over people. He spilled it on our friends. And so every time I hear this, Queen, ZZ Bad Nasty, I always think of the 7-foot-something guy standing behind us at that concert 20 years ago yelling, "ZZ!" all the way through Leonard Skinner's set.
Well, if they with the Mega SD on there, you can finally add that in yourself. Make your own audio track for the game.
Oh, man.
All right. Well, with the very entertaining story out of the way, I would definitely rank the story up there with the Tex-Mexium and the from the moon story of Einhanda.
Oh yeah, well it definitely ranks above the Coffee and Crystals of Raiden 5.
It that sets the bar low. I mean, that's like that's like a limbo bar for storyline is what Raiden 5 is.
How low can you go?
Oh, we will find out, I'm sure. And for anyone wondering, Deep Space Waifu is probably the lowest you can go, but we're not going to cover it here. All right, well, let's get on to something that is actually really exciting to talk about, and that is the gameplay. The primary mechanic of Gaiares is the TOS system. Think of it, the best way to think of this is the Force Pod from R-Type, right?
Kind of, yeah.
And it's a pod that follows your spaceship around like an option and can be launched at enemies and objects. When the TOS launches onto an object, it will leech power from that object and allow your ship to take on the characteristic related to it. For example, when you fire the TOS at an enemy, you can either enhance your ship's built-in weapon or steal a weapon upgrade from the enemy. I feel like in some ways we're talking a little bit about the increasing levels that people were having some frustration with earlier.
Yeah, a little bit, but this is... The TOZ system allows you pretty direct control over that, where once you kind of get a feel for what enemies will give you what weapon types, then you can really tailor that to how you want to do it. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
I definitely agree on there, although I did see that for the most part, people seem to be sticking with the same weapon, which is the giant laser, for the majority of what their playthrough.
Right.
The other interesting thing that should be mentioned with the TOS system is when you're firing it, you really are vulnerable. So it gives a nice risk-reward because you can't fire your shots as you're shooting it out trying to capture something.
Right.
Alright, so most weapons have more than one power level, as we previously discussed. So it's best to try and steal the same type of power-up more than once to make sure you have the most powerful version of a weapon. Usually there are 3 levels, aren't there, for most stuff?
For most weapons, there are 3 levels, yep.
Small, medium, and large, yep. Alright, so let's talk about some of the weapons. There is the I-Vulcan, aka the Iconic Vulcan. That's the opposed to the Anonymous Vulcan and other stuff, I'm sure. Your ship's default weapon, which fires a standard forward shot, can be upgraded twice to level 3, where it'll fire 3 shots in a stack formation. I mean, it was pretty nice. The I-Vulcan to me was a lot better than your standard pea shooter. You get a lot of games looking at you, Konami games and Gradius/Parodius, but it didn't give you that sort of control that I think you'll get with some of the later Danmaku games. But of course, this is way too early for any stuff. We didn't even get to something like Batsugun until 1993. So it definitely makes sense. I thought it struck a good balance. What did you think of the Iconic Vulcan?
Yeah, I mean, I think as default weapons go, it's not bad. I would say the nice thing is there are a number of enemies in the game that will offer you upgrades for this weapon as opposed to giving you a different one. So if you die and you start the stage off with nothing, generally speaking, the first enemy that you encounter, or one of the first enemies that you encounter at the beginning of a stage or at most of the checkpoints, are going to give you the chance to at least power this up to level 2 or 3, which gives you enough firepower to fairly easily take out most popcorn enemies and at least have a fighting chance against, some of the stronger enemies, or give you the ability to at least get through the first wave so then you can start fishing for a better weapon.
Yeah, I think it's a good default weapon that doesn't feel underpowered anyway and is definitely plays to the game's strengths. So let's move on. We have the P cannon, also known as the plasma cannon. Much better than some of the other stuff it could have fired, I'm sure. It shoots a two-way spread of energy balls from the ship. At level 3, it shoots balls behind your ship. This one I saw being used primarily in stages, for like into the part of stage 1, into some people used it in stage 2. It definitely has its uses for shooting behind your ship. And if you have it for when you're fighting I believe it's stage 3 if I remember correctly, the Grim Reaper boss, it definitely helps there.
Yeah, this is one that when I first started playing the game, a couple decades ago when I bought it, I remember kind of gravitating toward this weapon because of the wide shot and because it was a little bit stronger, not by a lot, but a little bit stronger than the standard eye Vulcan. So I did kind of gravitate toward this early on, and I used it a little bit during my playthroughs for the month, but it's not a weapon that I think is useful long term, because even at level 3 you get a two-way forward shot, which is sort of like 30 degrees up and then 30 degrees down, or approximately, and then behind you, but you still have no forward shot. So you still feel just a little bit vulnerable in some situations. So I feel like it works to help clear the field of popcorn, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's a long-term weapon that is going to be easy to beat the game with.
Yeah, that's safe for our next weapon, which is the G-Beam, also known as the Giga Beam. It's a large laser that covers a wide area. Level 2 widens the beam, and Level 3 allows the TOS to shoot a beam as well. Laser's hitbox might be a little smaller than the sprite itself, but the G-Beam can pass through scenery and objects as well as large enemies to damage enemies behind. And this really is the bread and butter weapon of the game, at least to me. It really does a great job of positioning you. There's one of the bosses later on, maybe it's the M, I think it's the M boss, where you position yourself just a little bit higher and let the TOS, or in this case an option, take out the weak spot. Well, the enemy's firing at where the TOS is and they're not firing at you. Did you have the same use for this weapon?
Yeah, this is one of those where I think a lot of people considered this to be the strongest or best standard weapon in the game, and I definitely spent a lot of time during the month playing and utilizing the Giga Beam. I think it's a really versatile weapon in a lot of ways, and it's strong enough, I think, that it's probably good for most situations.
Now, moving on from something that's good for most situations to something that's good for certain situations is the S-Laser, or the Somersault Laser. These are homing lasers that fire from the front of your ship upward and downward. Upgrades make them deploy slightly faster. However, it's a relatively weak weapon. You first see this weapon at the beginning of Stage 2 with the sort of targeted satellites that go through there. It was neat to use. It's cool, but it just doesn't have the punch that the Giga Laser has.
Yeah, this is one that when I discovered that the satellites would give you the homing laser, I thought, oh, homing laser, I gotta have that. But I found, at least years ago when I first got the game, I found that A, it was difficult to acquire the weapon safely and not get hit by the incoming lasers that the satellites were reflecting from the cannons below. But then also B, yeah, it's kind of a weak weapon. Even at level 3 where it shoots faster, it's still, you're still taking popcorn out quickly, but larger enemies are going to take more hits and you're going to be more vulnerable because they're going to be on screen longer and have more chance to either fire at you or run into you. So I don't think it's a super useful weapon other than in certain situations. And is not probably one of the better overall choices in the game.
It's neat to experiment, but it's not something that you want to use long term. The next weapon is the T-Missile, also known as the Tech-Type Missile, which brings back memories of The Legend of Zelda there. It has rapid-fire missiles from the front and back of your ship. Level 2 makes it a 4-way fire, adding top and bottom missiles, and level 3 adds 2 additional missiles firing at 45 degrees, upwards and downwards from the front of your ship. I don't think I used this more than once or twice. It just didn't have the punch. Did you use this at all?
Yeah, actually I used this one a fair bit, at least when I was able to successfully acquire it and hold on to it. The missiles are pretty powerful. And because they shoot quickly, they're really good at taking out targets pretty fast. Especially if you can get it leveled up to level 2 or even 3, then some of the larger mid-size enemies and things you can take out pretty quickly with these. So I feel like if this is a weapon that you can get a hold of and keep hold of and not die, then yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile choice. I don't think it's quite as versatile as the G-Beam, but because of its range, especially at level 2 or 3, it's worth exploring as an alternative.
Sounds like I need to go back and revisit it. Alright, moving on. The H-Laser, also known as the Horizontal Laser. It's similar to the G-Beam, but just a smaller, thinner version. Does not pass through scenery like the G-Beam, and starts as a very thin laser, and it widens the level 2 and level 3 upgrades. I mean, this was sort of neat to see in practicality on there. You just better off sticking with the G-Beam.
Yeah, I mean, the level 3 is kind of cool because it's a sort of a corkscrew laser. Looks a little bit like, what was it, the Sea Laser or whatever from Gradius. But it's slightly stronger than the Giga Beam, so if you're looking for strictly power, then this might be the way to go, because I think it might be the strongest single fire weapon in the standard arsenal. But the Giga Beam has so much going for it with the wider beam, the ability to pass through scenery, etc., that even though it's not as strong, it makes up for that with its other attributes. So I feel like the horizontal laser is almost like a second tier weapon.
Yeah, I would say that the H laser would be similar to if you're taking a sniper shot or something. You're going to have a very focused point of impact on there, but if you give me a chance between taking something out with a sniper shot or something with a cannon, I'm going to use the cannon. I'm going to make sure I take as much as possible, and I think that's sort of the comparison to make here. Alright, so the next one is the V laser, or vertical laser, and someone really likes lasers here. It creates a laser wave that shoots out from your ship that can deflect some enemy fire. At level 3, the wave widens, and the TAWs will also shoot waves. This was just something that I didn't really use too much. Again, I was so much on the Giga laser.
Yeah, and see, this is one of those that I think is both a blessing and a curse. The first chance that you have to get this weapon is in Stage 2. The mid-boss is this sort of flying dragon boss. You can get this weapon by launching the TOZ at that boss. If, despite that dragon's somewhat erratic movement around the screen, you can manage to leech it and launch the TOZ at it 3 times and get it fully powered up, this is a good weapon. It's very strong, and if you can get that level 3, so you get the wider beam and get the TOZ shooting these things, then you can cut down just about anything pretty quickly. The caveat with that is the Stage 2 boss. The first form of the Stage 2 boss, when you've got the shell, you practically have to be right up in its face or position the TOZ in such a way that when the shell's moving around, that the TOZ can be sort of like inside of the very front piece, so it actually does damage. Otherwise, it's going to take a really long time to get through the first phase of that Stage 2 boss. I don't think there's more than a couple of enemy types in the game that actually offer this. There's one that comes much later in Stage 5, I think, that offers this. There's one enemy type that offers it. And so if you're hurting for a good weapon or you need something better in Stage 5, then you can pick it up there. But yeah, it's a really good weapon, but it's hard to pick up, and it does have that Stage 2 boss caveat, which makes it a little bit harder to wield.
Alright, our next weapon is the Arg Collider, also the Rolling Collider. It begins as a 2-way short laser burst, and for each subsequent shot, the direction of the fire changes in a rolling fashion. At level 3, this is upgraded to a 4-way shot, and the TOS will begin firing the same 4-way pattern. Did you use this much at all?
I got it once or twice, once by accident, and once as I was just trying to leech everything to see what I would get. This is a weapon that I pretty much think is a novelty item and is not very much fun to use because you don't really have any control over where and when the weapon is going to fire. So it's not very practical.
Fair enough. Next we have the E-Smash, also known as the Energy Smash. You hold down the B button and a series of orbs start circling your ship, which can act as a shield and deflect some enemy fire, as well as take out enemies that get too close. Once fully charged, release the B button, and it will fire orbs out in a rolling circle pattern. At level 3, the TOS will get this ability as well. I don't think I ever got this one through any of my playthroughs. You find this about the same as the Arg Collider?
It's definitely more useful than that. I didn't really go for this one much because I find this one a little bit harder to wield. This is sort of like, think of the number 3 weapon type in Xanac, or what is it, the number 4 weapon in Blazing Lasers. Once you pair it with the F icon, and it gives you the ability to shoot out the sort of ring deals. But this one it's interesting because it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. You can hold the fire button down and create that rolling batch of orbs around your ship, and then you can release it once it's fully charged, and then get a barrage that shoots out and takes out stuff in its path. I got this a couple of times early on, didn't quite know how to use it, and then as I was kind of experimenting with the game the other day, just to kind of refresh on a little bit, I purposely went and tried to get this. And I'll say that it's a difficult weapon to obtain successfully and get to level 3 with, because you're very vulnerable while you are getting this weapon from that first batch of enemies in Stage 2, I think it is, where you can pick this up the first time. Now, the guide that I was looking at on Giant Bomb that had this whole weapon write-up where I kind of gleaned a lot of this information, they actually say there's a couple spots in the game where you practically need this weapon because, there's almost no room to move around. And I think if you're playing through with just the standard weapon set, I'm not going to say that they're entirely wrong. Those situations are doable, but this certainly makes it easier. But this is one of those weapons that I think you would really have to go in, master picking this one up in stage 2, and then just find a way to... You would probably have to route the game even more specifically in order to make sure that you can hold on to it and be assured that you're going to have it for when you need it later in the game.
All right. Let's move on to some of the hidden weapons in the game. We have the F formation. This weapon can be obtained when using the TAS on an enemy where the score is a multiple of 10,000, meaning the last 4 digits are zeros. When activated, the TAS splits into 5 segments and shoots out orange needles at high speed. Now, this is something you did by accident on your first, or was it second stream?
Yeah, it was the first or second stream, and then I got it one other time. I think when I was specifically trying to do it, I managed to get it at least one other time on stream. And I know one of the participants, Faux Macho, was watching along and was mentioning that, and he dropped that into the chat, and we were talking about it. And then I managed to get it, and I think there may be a little bit of a tolerance or a margin for error on that, because when I grabbed the weapon, I think he commented to say that my score was something like it was like 40,005 points or something like that. So I don't know if it was that I picked up a couple extra points right after I picked up the weapon, or picking up the weapon rewarded me the 5 points. I don't know, but it seemed like maybe there was just a little bit of a margin for error there. But either way, it's an interesting weapon, and yeah, the TOZ does this weird thing where it sort of blinks, and you've got almost like ghost versions of the TOZ that sort of spin around and shoot out these. They look like needles. I mean, think of like Needle Man from Mega Man 3, but larger versions of that shoot out at high speed, and it's a pretty effective weapon, but it's a little bit impractical to try and obtain, on a regular basis. I was not able to duplicate that again, and I tried multiple times to try to get this weapon again, and I just couldn't pull it off.
Yeah, it seems very cool, but very hard to pull off in a run. Our next hidden weapon is the T-Vulcan. To acquire this weapon, you need to shoot the TOZ a total of 128 times. They don't need to be consecutive. On the 129th TOZ launch, if you attach an enemy, your ship will get a 7-way spread shot. Well, I am not counting in shmups when I do with that, so I probably will never ever get this. All right, 128. All right, now shoot. No.
Yeah. I sat down a few days ago and actually tried to do this, and my plan was to count the number of TOZ launches that I did up to the mid-boss in stage 1, and then just sit there and dodge his attacks and just TOZ launch time and time and time again to count up to that 128, so then I could launch at the enemy that 129th time and try to get the 7-way shot, because I thought, well, 7-way spread shot, I mean, that's going to be pretty powerful and really allow you to take out stuff. So maybe that'll give me an edge and give me the ability to get through a good, significant portion of the game with that weapon. But I tried it several times and got really frustrated with it, was never able to achieve it, so I just gave up.
Sounds about exactly the way it would go for me as well. Next, we have the A-Bullet. This can only be locked once per game and only at the beginning of the game. At the start of level 1, quickly pause and unpause the game 8 times. Then deploy the TOZ at a non-enemy object, a smart bomb on level 1. The T-missile fires larger missiles that do a lot of damage. This was one that I wasn't aware of or hadn't tried. Have you tried to get this weapon?
Yeah, I did manage to grab this once. A couple of times, I think, on stream. I grabbed it once and then died almost immediately. And then I went back and I did it again and managed to hold on to it for a little while. It's pretty powerful. I mean, the missiles fire out quickly. They're more powerful even than the T-missile. And the downside, of course, being that they only fire forward. But it's a really strong weapon. But it might be a fun challenge to see how far you could get in the game with that. If you could do a no-death run using the A bullet, that might be interesting.
I would definitely watch that replay. Alright, so our last hidden weapon is a T-Braster, which I'm sure anyone knows about Japanese and the L and the R. Probably means T-Blaster.
Probably.
This weapon can only be obtained when your ship has the default iVulcan or normal weapon equipped. To acquire it, fire the TOZ 6 times at the right side of the screen, then on the 7th launch, make sure to capture an enemy. If successful, your TOZ will be equipped with a 5-way shot that sends homing energy orbs out at enemies. Your ship retains the default level 1 Vulcan. In addition, you lose a weapon after completing the stage run, so if you want to obtain this weapon again, you'll need to repeat the steps. So again, this is not one that I was aware of, but it sounds pretty cool that they threw in so much of these hidden weapons and adds a little something to the game. These days, you would probably end up as DLC weapon. They're hidden. We hid them from the game. $5.99 each.
Yeah. The T-Braster became my favorite weapon and my go-to basically from the moment that I was able to successfully obtain it easily in that first stage. Other than a little bit of additional experimenting that I did, this was my go-to. It works a lot like the Hunter from the Thunder Force series, but the one thing with the Hunter that you find is that while it's a good weapon, it's a little weaker than some of the other weapons. So what you make up for in its hunting ability, you give up a little bit of power. With this weapon, you don't have that. So these homing orbs are really powerful. They cut through popcorn enemies and most mid-size enemies in just no time at all. I mean, it rips everything like butter. So what I found, though, is there are a couple of the later stages where it's either difficult to obtain this at a checkpoint or even at the beginning of the stage it can be difficult to do this. So specifically stages 4, well actually even in stage 3 it can be a little bit difficult to obtain this at the beginning. You really have to dart down to kind of the bottom right corner of the screen and do quick, not stage 3, stage 4. Do quick 6 launches and then quickly bounce back to the back of the screen so you can grab one of the enemies and get the T-Braster and hope that you don't get a stray bullet in the meantime. And then again, stage 5, it gets increasingly hard to do that because there are enemies almost immediately and you don't have time to use the TOZ to get those launches in before that first batch of enemies comes. So you basically have to take them out with the default level of the iVulcan, then take the time to do your 6 launches so that when the next wave comes, you can grab it and hope that you don't get cut down by the swarm of bullets that comes and do that. Now, I managed to, by the end of the month, come up with a strategy for each stage and basically each checkpoint so that I could get this weapon and essentially utilize it through the whole game. But this weapon is a lot of fun to play with and definitely one that I'm not going to say it makes the game easy mode, but it certainly will give you an edge.
All right, great stuff to consider. Now, we have a couple things that aren't really weapons, they're more upgrades. So let's give a quick overview of them. Some stages will contain a smart bomb that can be used to destroy all small enemies, clear all enemy fire, and damage larger enemies. This can either be collected by flying the ship into it or by collecting it with a TOZ. Some levels will have a shield power-up known as the Break Defender. If you fly your ship into it, you receive a blue shield that will give you 3 hits before it's vulnerable again. On the last shield hit, it turns orange to signal it's nearly out of energy. Call back to Gradius, maybe?
Or Thunder Force.
Oh, yeah. If you launch the TOZ at the power-up first and then collect it with your ship, you will receive a total of 5 shield hits. When powering up your ship with the TOZ, you receive the Quark Missile. By targeting the ground-based enemies with it, you can upgrade to Double Missile that shoots both upwards and downwards, as well as some ground enemies will allow you to have this upgraded homing missiles as well.
Yeah, one thing to note about the smart bomb, there are a couple of instances in stage 3 and then again in stage 5 where the smart bomb will be on the screen at the same time as your shield power-up. Make sure you collect the shield power-up before you collect the smart bomb, because if you set off the smart bomb while the shield power-up is still on the screen, it will be destroyed, and you will not have the opportunity to grab it. I learned that lesson the hard way a couple times, and thought that was kind of a cheap deal within the game, but something to note if you're going to tackle this game.
Good advice for us all. Would you like to give an overview as well as head on to our next section?
Yeah. So the game plays out over 8 stages, the first 6 of which are unique, with stage 7 serving as a boss rush. And then assuming you beat the stage 7 end boss, you'll move on to an 8th stage, which is basically just a short segment with some asteroids to destroy, and then your final boss encounter with Queen ZZ Badnusty, ZZ, in a giant mech suit. There are a number of cheats and secrets in the game, in addition to the stuff that we've already mentioned with the hidden weapons. To access the game's configuration mode, you hold A, B, or C at the title screen and press Start. And there you can access the sound test, change the difficulty, or change the language between Japanese and English. Once you're in that config screen, you can activate cheat mode. To do that, you set the background music test to 18, and then hold the A button on controller 2, and exit the config mode menu. Now, once you have cheat mode activated, when you press start on the title screen, you will be taken to a level select. Excuse me, instead of just starting the game. Also, with cheat mode active, while you're in gameplay, if you pause the game and then hold down both A and C and press left on the D-pad, you will engage invincibility, which will stay in effect until the end of the current stage. Once again, pause the game, hold up on the D-pad, and press A. This will change the weapon that you have selected, and you can continue to press A to cycle through the different weapons. Once the name appears for the weapon that you want, you unpause the game and fire the TOZ into empty space to activate that weapon. And also, if you pause the game, hold up on the D-pad and press C, you can level up your current weapon to level 2, press C a second time to raise it to level 3. Again, unpause and fire the TOZ into empty space to confirm the change. And then there was something else that mentioned on a couple of websites that with firing the TOZ 128 times, but instead of using it to get the 7-way shot, it mentioned accessing a bonus level, but I was not able to confirm this anywhere, so I think it's just a misprint on a couple of websites.
It definitely could be. It could be that, or maybe was put in for April Fool's joke on there. You must defeat Shenlong in order to beat me.
Oh, yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me if it was a EGM joke at some point.
That could very well be.
It could be. Let's move on to the graphics. It's bright, it's colorful, and Bob Ross would have been proud. I have to agree. As mentioned earlier, it's one of the first titles to really give the Genesis that title of bringing the arcade experience home.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the early Genesis games during that era, people complained about not being as bright or colorful as they could have been, or some of the games had kind of a dark and dingy look. Gaiares doesn't have that at all. It's very bright, and it's very vibrant. And I think it's a good early example of a game on the system that really takes good advantage of the color palettes that are available for the console.
Not only that, it does a great job of making use of the sprites in there. Those bosses on there, the parallax scrolling, everything is distinct enough so you know what it is. This is one of those games where I didn't have any frustrations with where a bullet came out of nowhere or something like where I could. There were a couple spots on there where I had some problems with the parallax scrolling, caused me to have a little bit of trouble focusing on my ship, but it wasn't really anything that detracted from the overall experience. It's not like later on when we're talking about like Ghostblade, when you get those nice pink bullets that blend into everything. There wasn't anything like that here.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I put in the notes, you know, there are a couple of spots where, you know, there's some wavy backgrounds or things like that can be distracting, but
stage 3 or something, or the beginning of stage 2, or the end of stage 1 as you're trying to focus on those feathers coming out of the boss. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, but realistically, the game just has a lot going for it graphically. I mean, you know, I mentioned here in the notes, each stage has multiple distinct visual set pieces. The bosses are huge and fairly impressive, I think. And there are some really cool graphical details too, like stage 3, there's, as you're kind of going through to the second half of the stage, you're sort of going into this, I don't know, like flying into this big temple or building or whatever, and there are these pillars, and on the sides of the pillars are these sort of lamps with these flames that flicker, and you can see the light flickering against the pillar. And you know, it's not something that they had to do, but it was a nice little extra touch. Or when your ship is hit and explodes, there's this sort of rotating explosion thing that it does. Or there's the rolling shield effect that you get when you collect the shield, and different things like that. And so it's really impressive, a lot of the things that they do so early in the life of the console. And I think a lot of that is with the 8 megabit cart size. They were really able to squeeze a lot of stuff in there. Plus, you know, some of the backgrounds, like you said, they can be a little bit busy, but otherwise they're just impressive on the whole. Just like the intro, I'll say cinema, you know, but like the intro story segment that you see kind of during the game's attract sequence, you know, they're really well drawn character art, and there's not a ton of animation, but it's very impressive.
Yeah,
for a cartridge based game.
If you were to be asked on the seminal shoot 'em ups or shmups for the Genesis, this game would definitely be on the list, and it really draws parallels to a later title that would be, I mean, still is highly sought after, but Glaylancer. On there, I see a lot of the same effects used in Glaylancer to doing the same thing, especially with the parallax scrolling and with the astro field in stage 1 of Glaylancer, the sort of anime or cinema cutscene that are done on there. All these techniques that were pioneered in here were really brought forth later in Glaylancer. We know that Glaylancer is considered one of the best shoot 'em ups or shmups on the Genesis.
Yeah, and that came out a year, actually 2 years after Gaiares did. So, when Messiah put that out, they were basically just pulling from the Gaiares tool set, so to speak. And, Glailancer has its own things that they did with it. But, yeah, I mean, it really doesn't do that much beyond what Gaiares already did 2 years prior in terms of graphics and effects and overall presentation.
Now, one of the things that you did bring up in the notes here is that, and I completely agree, is some of the enemies look just not really the bosses, because they're really well drawn and draw attention to themselves, but some of the popcorn looks a little generic, and it was taken, like it may have been taken out of or slightly modified from a Gradius game. There, it doesn't do much to visually distinct itself from there, but that's really a minor gripe.
Yeah, I mean, Stage 4, I would say all the popcorn enemies in Stage 4 are pretty generic and bland, but then you kind of get made up for that with the crystals popping down out of the top of the screen, or the fireballs, shooting up from outside, out of the star that you're flying over.
Do you think that the fire was taken from inspiration from Gradius 2, maybe?
It's very possible.
It's not from Thunder Force. I looked and saw that Thunder Force 3 was contemporary with this, so...
Yep. Yeah, it's very possible this was a Thunder Force or a Gradius 2 callback.
Well, I mean, you should look at some of the inspirations where I am here, where it definitely pulls from the Valus series, which is also Telenet. You can see that within some of the design, especially the shield, the sword and shield lady at the end of was it Stage 6, I believe.
Yes, the people on my stream were calling it Mega Maid.
Oh, geez, we're referencing everything in here. We're going to reference Spaceballs now.
Yeah.
So, but I could see Valus referenced here, which is a Telenet game. I could see definitely Gradius was referenced in here. Maybe to some effect Thunder Force was referenced on here as like Thunder Force 2.
Right.
Some aspects on there. Where else do you think it pulls some inspiration from?
I don't know. I mean, I think this was just... The interesting thing is there's so much of this that you see in a lot of the games from this time period. So some of it might have just been just a lot of the same influences in anime and science fiction and, other cultural touchstones that were popular among young Japanese developers during that time.
Yeah, everyone's pulling from the same creative pool. That makes sense. The one thing I have to say is I really liked the cinemas of this game. The characters were really well drawn, and it was not something that you expected to see on the Genesis. I know that there were some early games. I forget what the it's one of the release games for the Genesis, where it's an anime game, and I can't think of the name right now. But the 7 siblings, or was it 9 siblings, something similar. It was a very popular anime that was seeing a revival around the time that the Mega Drive came out in Japan, that had those visuals, that crisp type. And I guess you could say that as well. When you have the Famicom and how the Famicom did so well with the cartoonish type elements that translate really well to sprites, this is the next level for it, and it really showcases it, and the art style really just pops.
Yeah, I mean, the character art during those story sequences, I kind of got, in terms of just the overall design of it, I got a little bit of a Phantasy Star 2 kind of vibe from it, except that these character portraits are larger, more detailed, and look even more like kind of late 80s, early 90s anime in style. So this is a couple years prior to either of the CD add-ons coming out in Japan. for either the PC Engine or the Mega Drive. So those are just really impressive for their time and are really well rendered drawings that I think, you can definitely see that, like you said, the same kind of art style present in the Valis series. And I think that holds true.
Well, what's interesting is, now I know that they were just beginning to get this within here, and the Mega CD was quite a while away, but the PC Engine CD was released October 30th, 1987, which is extremely early. Yes, in Japan, because NEC was a hugely into the PC or the CD-ROM into that stuff. Now I know it didn't release into the US until a bit later, but it's to see that type of innovation on there. Yeah, it's something that would have been neat to see.
I did not realize that the CD-ROM unit released that early in Japan.
Yeah, in Japan the CD-ROM came out much earlier than anyone expected, and it would have been really cool to see like this type of stuff there. Now I understand that they sort of prototyped this with Valis 2 renovation, but you could sort of see where they were headed on there. I'm not sure on Valis' 2 release date, but I would have to think it would be somewhere within like 91 or 92. And then we have look at Annette again. I can't. Annette Futatabi for the Mega CD.
Futatabi.
Yeah, for the Mega CD. Ernest Evans, I believe, was, if I remember correctly, was a Mega CD, at least in Japan. And all the stuff that Renovation, they were at the forefront of this technology and really embraced the CD-ROM technology. Look at about all of the was it not Ninja Assault, but they did several of the full motion video games. Right? Renovations was in charge of bringing everyone's favorite Road Avenger.
Huh.
We all know how much everyone loves Road Avenger. If you don't, go try it and you'll love it.
Huh.
But it really was at the forefront, Renovation at the forefront, bleeding edge of technology, and did a lot to bring it forward. It's too bad that the consumer wasn't quite ready for it yet for a lot of this stuff. But it would have been amazing to see what they do, and I hope that someone, again, with the release of the Mega SD from Terra Onion, creates some sort of visual enhanced version of this with maybe some Red Book audio or something on there would be wonderful to see. And speaking of the audio, would you like to take us in?
Yeah. Kind of my read on the game's audio is that the sound effects sort of run the gamut from unobtrusive to annoying. A lot of the sounds I think are pretty solid. Your standard iVulcan sound effect is pretty low impact and just kind of gives you that light pew pew sort of effect. Whereas a couple of the weapons like the the G-beam or a couple like that, when you're shooting the G-beam against metal or a larger enemy that is going to take several hits to take down, because the G-beam is a lengthy laser, it's making this sound effect when it's coming into contact with the enemy. So it's sort of like, it's weird to hear a laser making a sort of clanging noise on metal when it's firing at it, but that's what it does. And so that gets a little bit old. And a couple of the other weapons have slightly annoying sounds, but on the whole, I think the sound effects are pretty solid. There's also an interesting sound with the TOZ when you launch it. I can't really describe it, you just have to hear it, but the TOZ kind of makes a cool noise when you launch it. But the soundtrack to the game, I think, is pretty strong compositionally. I do wish that Telenet had been able to use a broader and more diverse sort of sound font or instrument set, if you will, within the Genesis sound, because you hear what a developer like Technosoft was able to get out of the system, even as early as Thunder Force 2. But the tunes in the game are quite good. I just don't think they sound as good as they could if Telenet had a little bit better command of the sound hardware. But having said that, they're pretty catchy, and I definitely enjoy the soundtrack in this game.
Yeah, I definitely enjoy the soundtrack as well. I would rate it as good to very good, but not great. I mean, it doesn't have that amazing soundtrack as you get from Lightning Force. But keep in mind, this is at 1990, so I think it does a lot better than most games were and should be commended, especially for not using gems. Oh,
right.
Thank you for not making my ears bleed. So, I am. Well, I won't find myself humming a lot of the songs in here. I also won't have my ears bleeding. So, it's definitely good, but it's not something that you're going to be listening to, and I don't think it's something that we're going to see put the soundtrack for on vinyl and see a huge demand for the soundtrack outside of the game.
Yeah, that's a vinyl album that I'd probably buy just because I enjoy the soundtrack, and I do. That's one of those where I'll put it on as background music sometimes, but it's not one of my go-tos. It's just one that, I haven't listened to the Gaiares music in a while, but it's not one that I'm gonna go to on a frequent basis.
Yeah, like 1942, right? That's everyone's go-to.
Right.
All right, you want to take us in a little bit on scoring?
Yeah, the scoring in the game is pretty basic. There aren't really any tricks, other than, we kind of mentioned this during the question of the month, but there's a couple of bosses that will shoot out missiles, so there's a little bit of milking that you can do with those, shooting out the missiles and not shooting at the boss as much so that you can do that kind of a thing. Or I think one of the mid-bosses in stage 5, you can if you can find a way to sort of hang out toward the bottom of the screen, you can try to avoid hitting the boss and shoot a bunch of the fireballs that come out from the bottom and get those. But realistically, there's not much going on. The one thing I'll say is in stage 2, the underwater section, there's this sort of coral that is all over the screen. And so it's similar to the
Life Force
kind of pink, fleshy stuff in Life Force, or what we called the gravy and meatballs section in Gradius 3, where you kind of have to bore through the sand. And so if you have the G-beam, you can kind of go up and down and clear out all of that. I will say the T-Blaster is not great for that section, but you do get points for every little snippet of that coral that you grab or that you shoot down. It's little point values, like in the single digits, but it is a few extra points that you can glean. And so if you like being able to eke out every last little bit of score in a game, that's at least one thing you can do to maximize that. Otherwise, that's about it.
All right, and speaking about that's about it, let's take a look at some of the thoughts of the RF Gen community. We've got some thoughts here from Saturday Development. Just got my copy today. Count me in. Later post answering Gamer 707B's question. We just go for the high score during the month. Getting a 1cc would certainly help. Later post. I'm not getting past level 2 on a single credit, so I haven't had any scores worth reporting. But I'll try to drop in one over the weekend. I'm going to try the T-Blaster or T-Blaster trick. It makes some extra firepower will help. And I definitely have to say that, as strange as it sounds to say this, level 2 seems to be a sticking point. It took me a little bit to get through that. I don't know if that's just the cave terrible 2s rearing their head, or what that is. This game is hard. Everyone will tell you the game is hard and requires memorization. With these type of classic games, memorization is a necessity. Especially if you're dealing with something like R-Type, or heck, even Gradius 3. But this game more so is one that requires you to know what's coming before it actually shows up on screen. Would you agree?
Yeah, Stage 2 was kind of always the early wall for me a couple of decades ago when I first picked up this game used. And, this is always one of those shmups that I never really put a lot of time into. It was always, I haven't played this game for a while, pick it up, drop it in the Genesis, bang away at it for 30 minutes or an hour, get frustrated, and then put it away and move on to something else. It was never a game that I dug into very seriously until now. And so yeah, Stage 2 is definitely a step up in difficulty from Stage 1, enough to where it can be an initial wall. Steve Ovig joined and said, "Can we use the Genesis Mini to play it?" And then, oh, never mind, I see the above post. Count me in, even though I probably won't do well. And we don't know how well you did, Steve Ovig, because I didn't see any other posts from you. So let us know if you put a lot of time into it, because we didn't see anything else.
Well, hopefully you did well. All right, our next one is from Gamer707B. Count me in. I love this game. Still have my copy. Back in the day, I remember seeing the ads for this game and thinking it reminded me of another beloved Genesis series, Phantasy Star. I wonder which ad that is. I'll have to ask him, because if I saw the mullet ad, that would not remind me of Phantasy Star. But I definitely understand that the artwork definitely does. And we mentioned this earlier within the portraits or the anime cutscenes. The theme and overall style was very similar. So how does this work? Play it for a month and take pictures of high scores, or who can do a 1cc? Later post. I was wondering why nobody's talking about this game. I guess nobody uses the shmup forums, or the farm forums, as Mark would call it, anymore. Why? I'm assuming people migrated. I'm assuming people migrated here. Anyway, got to level 3, a total score of 270,392 on my first credit last night. Playing this game again reminded me of how great and underappreciated it is as a 16-bit shooter, and also how hard it is. Man, is it challenging, but very good. Later post, the key to a lot of this game, as you know, is picking the right weapons at certain times. I personally use the thick laser. I like that better than the G laser. I want the thick laser. You can get early on in level 1 for most of the game, but for level 5 Dragon, I switched to something else. He goes up pretty quick. It's been a while, so I don't remember offhand. Once I get there, I'll let you know. Later post, you're ripping it up, bro. I struggled on level 3, but eventually made it to level 4. At this rate, you'll be done with the game in no time. Are you going for 1cc or just clearing it? It's nice to hear that you ripped and teared your way through the game. Later post, I did 4 credits yesterday before work. I got to the middle of level 3 on 1 credit. Then I used the remainder credits and ended up on the second mini-boss of level 5. I forgot there were 2 mini-bosses on this level. I'm going out of town for work next couple days, but I'm having a go at it when I get back. Love the 16-bit shooters. Later post. Alright, just got back into town yesterday and looking forward to playing some more credits. How's your progress, bro? And where is everybody else? Besides us two, everybody else has gone silent. And I have to apologize for that. I have been silent on that. Not so much of my own volition, but due to everything going on with COVID. So hopefully we will get back on track, get this train back on the tracks here, and get everything back on a regular schedule. Okay, so just did a playthrough and got to level 6 boss, the female mech with a sword. The Valis soldier, or the, what'd you call it, the Roomba
Mega Maid?
Oh, Mega Maid. Roomba Maid. Not so much room to maneuver in this one, it's pretty tight. Later post responding to Full Macho's frustration, Stage 2 boss. What I do with her is I shoot in the middle of her shell right when the fight starts. Then right before she shoots the 3 missiles, I go above her and to the right, ending up almost in the middle of the top of her shell. That way her missiles can't get me. Rinse and repeat until the shell opens. I'll let you figure the rest out. You'll have more fun that way. Later post, I have taken a week off from it, but looking forward to getting back to tomorrow. Not thinking of 1cc, but maybe a 2cc or 3cc. I remember playing originally in 1cc in it, so now I'm just happy completing it. And his final post. Okay guys, did my last playthrough today, got to level 5 on 1 credit, and used another credit to pass it and get to level 6. After 2 credits I gave up. In all honesty, I just don't have the desire to keep pushing. Being that I cleared the game a while ago, great game though. Certainly one of my favorites this generation, maybe top 3. Look forward to doing the Shmup of the Month game next to something I have yet cleared. Too bad Thunder Force 4 and R-Type have already been done. Those 2 games I've yet to clear. Oh, let nothing stop you get in the way of trying to clear Thunder Force 4 and R-Type. Those are great games, and I still continually go back to those.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, carve out time for those regardless, because they're both worth your time.
Especially now you can play especially now you can play Thunder Force 4 and even R-Type with R-Type dimensions on the Switch. Really great way to play those when you have a moment.
For sure. Dingo jumped in and said, "Count me in. Seems like an interesting title. I only remember seeing Jeff Gersman of Giant Bomb do a play session of this at one point." And then later in the thread he says, "Yeah, for sure. Kind of like a more direct and primary version of the G. Darius capture mechanic." Speaking about the TOZ system. Just started playing for the month. Flying Demon Boss ended my run pretty quickly. Definitely going to have to hang on to as much of that shield power-up as possible. And I want to say that he was referring to the Stage 1 boss, because I know he came into one of my streams, or a couple of my streams, and so I was giving him some advice on what to do with that Stage 1 boss. And he said, "I just learned of ZZ Badnesty's diabolical schemes. I hope I can learn to use the TOZ system." He also says, "Power-up system is pretty unique. Fastest speed is super fast."
Our next post is from Full Macho. "Hi there. I started listening in December, and now I'm ready to join the friendly competition. Welcome, glad you joined us. I'm planning to get my hands on the cartridge and play on my CRT, but I also might try emulation with Arcade Stick. I'm newer to shmups, but already buying them faster than I can play them. I think they're just neat." And I have to agree, I think shmups are neat as well, and join the club here on buying them faster than you can play them. It's a good problem to have.
And in the thread, it was funny because along with that post, he posted a picture that showed Marge Simpson holding some kind of thing. I don't remember what it was. And at the bottom, it has her saying, "I just think they're neat." So I thought that was funny.
Excellent. Later post, on his stream last night, MetalFRO randomly got a different TOS weapon, F formation. Than what that enemy normally gives. After searching info about it, I found that happened because he had a score of 10,005. And of course, we discovered and later talked about the secret weapons and why that happens, which is a neat addition. Later post, I luckily got the F formation myself last night. It too does not last past the end of the stage. The 128 attempt power-up feels so much like a 90s April Fool's joke, since most of the description of this is the same sentence copy and paste around the end, and there's no YouTube proof I can find. But the Giant Bomb page is the best, most original reporting I've seen on it, in all weapons, so I'll give it a try. I completely agree, and we talked about this earlier. It seemed like a fake EGM April Fool's joke that you get from the Quartermaster, or maybe from Sushi X.
Yeah.
I think that the first mini-boss is a great spot to grind deploys, especially if one of the corners is a safe spot, yes. By placing the TOZ right in front of the ship, it's not hard to create one. On the Clan Mermaid Stage 2 boss, the patterns force me to the top of the screen, and by placing the TOZ just right, I'm safe to fire away. And it's a strategy that really works well, again, with the Gaiares series too. You can get used to placing your option, so that way you can do the most and hit the weak point for maximum damage. So far, it's been brutal to die. I see where you get 5 lives and not 3. After dying, I often lose multiple lives. I was just trying to get started again. Again, we're dealing with the Gaiares syndrome on here. It's definitely hard to do, but definitely not as hard as the Gradius games themselves.
Right.
Later post, I took a week off playing Gaiares and put some time in the Castlevania Bloodlines on the Switch collection. But now I have a Genesis and a Gaiares cart, so I got that hooked up, and after working with a bit of cleaning, I was previously playing on Raspberry Pi, and honestly, this is the first time I played on Genesis, other than a faint memory or two. Wow. Impressive. The Genesis is definitely worth driving and delving into the library. There's so much good games on there. But I mentioned Bloodlines on there. You have Sonic the Hedgehog, Phantasy Star on there. Do you take it or leave it with Ristar on there? That's not for everybody, but it's still a great game. There you have Quackshot on there. There's so many good games to try out there. Congratulations to you, sir.
Yes, and a quick shout out to Easy Racer from the site, who just compiled a list of the top 20 Sega Genesis games as chosen by RF Generation, and so that's on the front page of the site. Go check that out.
The D-pad doesn't feel the greatest, so maybe I can get another controller from the used game store near me, but trying not to go out if I can't help it. I completely agree on that. If you're having some problems with the D-pad, one of the best things you can do, and this is just a tip on here, is to take some distilled water or filter water and boil it, and then take the rubber membrane from the pad and boil it, and that will help it regain some of its form, so that way it's nice and springy again.
Yeah, just the rubber pad part, though.
Oh, yes, definitely. Please do not throw the entire controller in there. They're disassemble the controller first. Anyway, in the run I did tonight, and still defeated by the Stage 2 boss. The run was really good until then, so I'll make sure to get him next time. Later post. Thanks for the tips, y'all. I've gotten more comfortable with the D-pad, and daily attempts to help them with memorization and strategy. I got halfway through Stage 4, the X-shaped centipede with a space worm was my end. Yeah, that really reminded me of R-Type, and I was having flashbacks to Stage 2 of R-Type and the Gaiaresque-ness of it all.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we should touch on briefly, since we didn't really talk about it before, but I noticed in that section that it really highlights the fact that your hitbox in the ship is a lot smaller than I would have guessed. A lot of these games from this era, the hitbox is basically the ship sprite, or the ship sprite, but maybe you have a pixel or two of leeway. But actually the hitbox on this ship, for the most part, seems to be fairly forgiving as compared to a lot of other shooters of this type from that era. So there's a couple situations where that doesn't necessarily apply, or it seems like it's situationally not quite as lenient, but overall it definitely feels a bit more
forgiving. Yeah,
that's a good way to put it.
MetalFRO, I haven't caught your recent streams, but I want the T-Blaster. I'll move to the right side of the screen because I can fire off the TOZ faster and get the 6X I need. My personal best is currently sitting at 486,898. Good job. Alright, later post commenting on MetalFRO's issues with Stage 4 Snake section. There's lots of leeway with the rocks, but the large bullets always get a corner of my ship. I'm good at dodging in the upper and lower left branches, but on the right side of the game's general limit on how far the ship can go to the edge gets me making errors. I might succeed with practice, but I think my best chance to clear this section is getting through in my first attempt when I still have the shield. Here's the shield power-ups I know of. Know any more in the first half of the game? Stage 1, after the mid-boss. Stage 2, after the 2 air-to-ground lasers. Stage 2, upper tunnel on the second mountain. Stage 3, top of the screen a little ways, in once the ship gets to the column section, usually right after finishing the second giant charging sprite. Stage 3 or 4, during or after the first snake fight in the city. I don't have a second controller, so I don't think I can access the stage select, but maybe I'll go back to the emulator for practice.
Yeah, and I didn't think that there was a shield in stage 5, but there is if after the mid-boss or after kind of the midway point in that stage, you go and take the upper path, then you do have access to a shield.
I have to say, if you're searching for a second controller, one of the best controllers for the Genesis I found has to be the M30, which is the 8-bit Do or 8-bit Do, depending upon how you pronounce it. The 2.4 gigahertz version, made specifically for the Genesis itself, really handles latency well, or input lag well, and gives you that nice feel of a combination between the 6-button Genesis pad and a Saturn controller. I know that you recently picked one up for a Bluetooth version for your Switch. How do you like it, bro?
I like it quite a bit. I definitely see myself using that when I play some non-shmups. For the most part, I think I'm probably going to handle most shmups on the Switch with my arcade stick, but there are definitely some platform games and some non-shmups that I'm looking forward to playing on the Switch with that controller, because I do think it's probably an overall better D-pad and more comfortable even than the SF30.
And not only that, if you catch the Amazon Stars Align, you can get it for just about $20 shipped with Prime, which is a great deal. Alright, so would you like to go over the plethora of high scores for the month?
Yeah, plethora. Yeah, unfortunately, we only had 2 high score submissions for the month. I managed to get the highest score. I hit 1,409,550 points, and that was because I managed to reach the Stage 7 boss on at least 1 credit. And then Faux Macho, the previously mentioned, 486,848 points. So we did not get score submissions from the other participants. So I would say, don't worry about, don't be self-conscious about a score. Submit anyway. Post pictures, show us your progress, and that'll be a great way for people to encourage one another to keep fighting and keep going at it, because I really think that having that kind of team atmosphere and that sort of people rooting each other on really helps to kind of motivate those of us who are participating to keep doing so and to keep going back to a game. So please, everyone, submit your scores.
Moving on to our final thoughts for the game, I have to say that this is a game that I have wanted to dive more in depth to, and from the time I was able to spend with it, it did nothing but make me smile. It endeared me more to the game, and I can see why it, many, many, many years later, is still very highly thought of. It has the parallax scrolling that you don't normally see. It has the polish. It has the large and colorful sprites. It has the music that doesn't destroy your ears. It really creates a very well package that encapsulates what early 90s to mid 90s shooters would become. It's one of the best of the 16-bit era. And I think that it's small issues on there, such as the parallax scrolling, maybe on there a little bit of the music not always being 100% there, and some of the issues on there. We both had an issue where one of the small or popcorn enemies on the end of stage 1 decided to just sort of start following us and got stuck. That became a little bit of annoyance. But overall, those are such minor things, and overall the package is amazing. I would recommend this to anybody who has even a passing interest in the Genesis as one of its standout titles, and could easily see why it's still highly regarded today and why it's selling for such a high price. But it's one of those ones I'd say it's worth it to spend the money on.
Yeah. This is one of those games that I've always held in high regard, even though I always felt like I was kind of terrible at it. But the truth of the matter is, I just never put in the time to get good and learn the game at a very, medium to high level. Having put in the time and played it for a month, I'm glad that I went back to it, because even though I wasn't able to get the 1 credit clear, I did manage to beat it on, like 3 credits or what have you. And so I still was able to get to the final boss and see the end credits and the end sequence and all of that. And it was a rewarding experience. I would still like to get the 1 credit clear at some point. I went back to it over the weekend again to give it a couple of runs and see if I could do it. Wasn't able to pull it off, but I think this is one of those that I may pull off the shelf now and again to de-rust a little bit, find a groove, and try to get back to that boss rush level so that I can finally take down that stupid boss at the end of stage 7 with its kind of semi-ridiculous RNG. Because really, the final boss encounter is not that difficult. It's actually pretty easy in comparison. And so, if you can get past the stage 7 boss, I would say, I'm not going to say you're home free, but it's certainly something where you should be able to fight your way through stage 8 and beat the game at that point without too much additional effort. So, I would say, yeah, this is definitely worth looking into, and if you can find it somewhat cheaper, I would say pick up a copy. The prices that it's commanding these days for even just a cartridge-only copy are a little bit ridiculous. I mentioned on my stream, when I picked it up 20 years ago, I bought it for $5. You're not likely to find it for $5 these days unless you get lucky and get it at Goodwill or a pawn shop or something. But it is definitely worth putting some time into and learning the ins and outs of how to use the TOZ system, because as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I really like that sort of enemy lock-on mechanic where you somehow lock onto an enemy or harvest an enemy or capture enemies in some way, and this is just one iteration of that. And so it kind of makes me sad that Telenet and Renovation, they published a decent number of shmups, but this is the only one they ever developed in-house. I feel like if Telenet could have kept going and could have honed their craft in this sense, we could have seen either a sequel to Gaiares later in the Genesis life, or possibly in the 32-bit era, or something else that they could have done that maybe they could have learned from the successes of this game and then kind of taken stock of the reviews at the time to see what people didn't like about it and gone back with a second effort that could have been something really special. But I would say for a one-off, this kind of reminds me of Einhander, in the sense that Squaresoft put out this one amazing shoot-'em-up game, and they never really visited the genre again. And in their case, even though it would be nice to see a sequel to that or something else in that vein, that's a pretty good example of something that they visited once and never did again. I don't think this is quite on the same level as Einhander, but I do think that for its time and as early in the life of the console that it was, Telenet Japan should have been very proud of what they did, and it's a flawed experience, but it's a very strong experience at the same time. So hats off to the development team for a pretty strong shoot 'em up that really has some unique elements and plays well to the strengths of the hardware.
Yeah, I really would have loved to see what they would have been able to do with this, like a Sega CD or Mega CD upscale of this. Similar to, I mean, I was impressed by Android Assault or Revenge of Bariarm.
Yeah.
That reminded me a lot of what this game could have been turned into had it gone to full CD support. I guess maybe even a better one is to do Musha to RoboLest. Yep. I mean, you get that sort of addition. You take the core gameplay, you add your Red Book audio on there, some really weird FMV, but you get that sort of that nice scaling and rotation that the Sega CD can bring to it, and I think that would have really done well for something like this, a renovation as a sequel. It's a shame we won't be able to see this. If you're curious about this, I think that going the route of the Genesis Mini will probably be your best bet, so that way you're actually have a legal version of this that you can try out without spending too much money on it. It's a good gateway.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, speaking of gateways, or in our case, segues, let's talk about what's coming next. Well, as we're recording this, we mentioned earlier, we're sort of in the middle of April, and we're deep into Steel Vampire, which is an excellent doujin shmup that, like an onion, has layers that you must peel back. Thankfully, though, it won't make you cry like an onion. There, I have been thoroughly enjoying the time that I put into it, and there's a lot of stuff going on here, which seems sort of like a simple Ketsui point blank everything and keep going at it until it goes to turn into something that's deeper, more rewarding within each playthrough, and has been refreshing. It's definitely more manic and more surprising, and nice not to have to deal with perfect routing all the time that you get in your cave-style Danmaku games. So it's definitely worth a shot. I think it's probably between $10 and $15 at most. Usually it's on sale on Steam. So if you're curious on it, it's definitely a game to pick up and try. So come on, join us.
Yeah. And then in May 2020, we are going to be finally taking on Fantasy Zone. Yeah, Opa. So, yeah, so we're finally going to be playing Fantasy Zone from Sega. And as I mentioned in my YouTube video that I did announcing this, there are so many different ways to play this game, so many different versions and iterations that there's almost no excuse to not join us, because you can play this on a whole bunch of different consoles, including the Switch now with the new Sega Ages release of the game. And so if you own this on any of your consoles, I would encourage you, please come to rfgeneration.com forums and sign up to participate with Fantasy Zone, because I would love to see a lot of impressions of this game and different takes based on the various console ports and versions, because there's a lot to talk about with all of that.
I think it's worth putting a special subcategory for Arnold Palmer Tournament Golf.
Yes, well, I picked up a copy of Arnold Palmer Tournament Golf because of the hidden one stage of Fantasy Zone, and so I plan on doing that on stream. I think the way to unlock it is you have to hit the ball 99 times on the first hole or something like that. So basically just sort of tap the ball a whole bunch of times and not ever sink it, and then it unlocks. What's the guy's name from from Happy Gilmore. Just tap it in. Just tap it in.
Oh man, I can't make it. It's 2020. I can't make a Happy Gilmore reference. All right. Please come and join us. Come join the fun. They're sheltering in place. It's a good time to play video games. So come join us.
Indeed.
We'd like to thank Sarah Flash of Studio Mudprints, Bullet Heaven for the logo. We have our own podcast shirts, which if you've seen Sarah Flash's live streams, you may have seen him rocking the orange version. We'd like to also thank Kogasu for the intro and outro music. Everybody who joined us for this month's playthrough. We'd also like to thank everyone at the RF Gen Playcast and Collector Cast. Everyone who's participating in the RF Gen NES Challenge. And like to thank MetalFRO for streaming the Shmup Game of the Month. It's not easy with those dogs around, so good luck with that.
My chihuahuas don't make shmupping on stream easy, but I manage. And I haven't streamed Steel Vampire as much as I could or should, but it's been a weird month. So definitely hoping to finish out strong here this next week, and then hopefully stream and play a lot of Fantasy Zone.
I think that Steel Vampire is going to win for strangest story ever in a shmup. Have you read over the story for that thing? Oh my goodness.
Not yet.
It makes Tex-Mexium looks like Shakespeare.
I'll have to check that out. Well, if you'd like to connect with the podcast, follow us on Twitter at ShootCoreCast, or you can follow me directly at GameBoyGuru. Join rfgeneration.com. Again, that is free. And join us for a Shmup Club playthrough. Also, if you're listening to the podcast and you like what you hear, give us a subscribe, rate, and review on the podcast platform of your choice. We are on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Google Play. Also, check out the RF Generation Discord channel, which is linked from the front page of rfgeneration.com, and check out the dedicated Shoot the Corecast topic where you can discuss the Shmup Club Game of the Month, the latest episode, or just shooting games in general. And as mentioned, follow me on Twitch. I am at twitch.tv/GuruGameBoy, and follow me there to get notifications of new streams so you can see when I am streaming the Shmup Club Game of the Month. Anything else we need to hit on before we get out of here?
Well, I just say whether you want to shoot the bleep or shoot some popcorn and games, come check us out.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you, and stay safe.
ZZ!